call our meeting to order, colleagues. We're a little bit short of time today for reasons that will become clear on the record. I see a quorum. We're reviewing the estimates of Public Works and Government Services Canada. We welcome with us today as witness Minister Christian Paradis and a number of important ministry staff to help us with our review of the estimates. I believe the Minister will be making an opening statement, and I invite him to do that now. I will note as we begin that the Minister is only able, for real reasons, to be with us for the first hour. The officials will remain. The Minister may wish to make a comment on that as he makes his remarks. Welcome, Minister Paradis, and the floor is yours.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, dear colleagues. I'm very glad to be before you today for the first time. And let me go straight to the point. I have a meeting, a federal provincial meeting at noon. I'm expecting my counterparts from Quebec regarding infrastructure. And I wanted to tell you this right off the bat, Mr. Chair. So I'm very pleased to be before you for a great premiere, because as you surely know, the department's main estimates for fiscal year 2009-2010 are a net of $2.4 billion, an increase of $44.4 million over last year. In the supplementary estimates A, we are seeking approval for approximately $350 million in additional funds. With 14,000 employees in every region of the country, PWGSC plays a critical role in the government's daily operations and in the everyday lives of Canadians.
PWGSC's responsibilities as the government's central purchaser and property manager. It's because of these and other responsibilities that the department plays such a critical role in our government's plan for getting Canadians back to work and kick-starting our economy. Dans le cadre du Plan d'action économique du Canada,
under Canada's Economic Action Plan, Budget 2000 allocated more than $400 million to PWGSC over 2 years to repair and renovate federally owned infrastructure. The department moved quickly to develop a 2-year plan, the Accelerated Infrastructure Plan, to speed up the rehabilitation of our federal buildings. And I am pleased to report, Mr. Chair, that our share of the infrastructure funds is already being invested in ways that are creating and maintaining good jobs in every region of Canada. Broadly speaking, my department's projects fall under 3 main areas. The bulk of the funding, $323 million, will be allocated to repair and restore projects in federal buildings across the country, including the Parliament buildings. $40 million will be used to enhance accessibility to federal buildings, specifically those that serve Canadians, such as human resources and skills developments, Canada, Service Canada, Canada Revenue Agency, and Citizenship and Immigration Canada buildings. Together, these investments in federal buildings will amount to literally hundreds upon hundreds of projects, both large and small.
Will go into the repair and restoration of 4 federal bridges: the LaSalle Causeway in Kingston, the Burlington Lift Bridge, and here in Ottawa-Gatineau, the Chaudière Crossing and the Alexandra Bridge. Finally, $2 million will be used to develop a plan for the future of the historic manège militaire in Quebec City. Public consultations are presently underway. Les fonds alloués en vertu du plan d'action.
Funds allocated under Canada's Economic Action Plan must be spent by the end of the next fiscal year, and my department's share will be divided roughly 50-50 over those 2 years. Believe me, we intend to invest every cent, and we are well on our way. Mr. Chair, there is no doubt that this investment will have a positive impact on the Canadian construction industry, much of which is comprised of small and medium enterprises. Some funds will be dispersed through our property management service provider, SNC Lavalin Profac, which has a proven record of efficiency and broad engagement of small and medium enterprises across the country. Based on last year, Profac expects to work with more than 3,700 small and medium enterprises to deliver this work on our behalf from coast to coast.
Called to make work on our behalf. En ce qui concerne les ponts, on a déjà complété la majeure partie des travaux préparatoires et certains contrats.
As for bridges, much of the preparatory work has already been completed and certain contracts have been awarded. In fact, work on the Alexander Bridge and the LaSalle Causeway has already begun. PWGSC is also coordinating closely with other departments that received infrastructure funds by providing real property, procurement, and translation services. We are exploring measures to streamline processes to allow more flexibility in contracting without compromising our principles of fairness and transparency.
Rules continue to apply. In fact, the program management framework that my department has put in place includes a robust risk management framework, including risk mitigation strategies and plans. Mr. Chair, I'm proud of the work of my department and even more so of its positive contribution to our country's economic well-being in these difficult times. Pour conclure, Monsieur le Président, j'aimerais féliciter le comité pour ses...
In conclusion, Mr. Chair, I would like to commend the committee for its hearings on the ability of small and medium enterprises to access federal procurement. I believe that this is an important issue, and I look forward to reading the committee's report and its recommendations. Thank you for your attention. I am now ready to answer your questions.
I think we will stay with the 8-minute opening round, since this is estimates and effectively a first appearance. This will mean that each party will have an opportunity to engage for the 8-minute first round, but it will mean that some members individually may not have an opportunity to address the minister after the first hour. But they will have an opportunity to address questions to the officials. So I'm about to turn to Ms. Hall-Findlay for the first round.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just noting that the last time we only had a minister for an hour, we only barely got the full 2 rounds in on the 5-minute basis. So,
in this particular case, the meeting will continue past the first hour, so members will have plenty of opportunity to ask questions. I was of the view that it was more important for the parties to have an 8-minute round to put issues to the minister. If members don't feel that way, you want to go right to 5-minute rounds, we can.
no, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just wanting to be consistent with the last meeting, but if it is possible, then I will share my time, my 8 minutes with my
Chair
colleague.
doesn't want to be consistent with the last meeting. I've tried to articulate why I didn't want to be. If you're ready to go, you've got 8 minutes.
Thank you, yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Ministre. Merci.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. Thank you for all of you for having come out here this morning. We have many questions, and we only have 1 hour, but we'll do what we can.
Has to do with asset sales, and this relates to information that came in the economic update in the fall, but also in the more recent budget materials, that there is a provision in the numbers for asset sales that would reach a total of $10 billion over the course of 5 years. And recognizing that federal government assets are made up primarily of crown corporations and real estate, the assumption is that an awful lot of what might be sold would come under your department, Mr. Minister. We have asked a number of times for information on what assets might be considered. To date, have not any information of any specific assets. The first question is, how will we see the $2 billion approximately for this fiscal year in revenue from asset sales? What would those assets be, and what is being considered for this year and the next 4 years in order to achieve that $10 billion?
Okay. Merci de votre question. Alors, bon, tout d'abord.
Thank you for your question. First, I would like to state clearly that PWGSC manages about 1,500 buildings with about 241,000 federal public servants, and out of these buildings we have about 1,200 that have been are rented and 300 that are ours. These are ballpark figures, of course, and none of these assets are identified by that part of the budget that you've just mentioned. So certainly we have a capital budget that is on a recurring basis. We can buy and sell grounds and real estate and buildings, but there are no public works involved in that, so as it is not I can't answer much more about it. Oh, thank you, but it's kind of hard to have someone on one side who's saying we're going to have 10 billion over 5 years and 2 billion this year only, with the sale without knowing which ones are being sold. So isn't there a problem that you're going to have 10 billion without knowing where that money is? And frankly, with that recession, what assets can be sold now?
Talking about a fire sale in order to achieve a projection of $10 billion to approximately 2 in this fiscal year. One, without knowing what they are, but also worrying that we're going to end up in a fire sale just to meet these commitments.
Alors, encore une fois, comme
Once again, as I said, I mentioned the 1,500 buildings of PWGSC. 300 are their property and 1,200 are rented. But all the assets of the Canadian government are much greater than that. Several departments are involved. I'm not really enabled to tell you what all the other assets are, because now I'm just looking at the budget. You have to show me exactly. And we're being told that the Minister of Finance said that there will be cooperation with portfolio holders whose assets have been identified. So if there are no assets from PWGC identified within this operation, thus I'd rather refer you to Finance. I can't answer you on this because our normal operations will carry on and there are no assets identified within this framework. Thank you. I'll share my time with a colleague. Good morning, Mr. Minister, and ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the committee. We'll try to be quick. We'll come back to your civil servants and officials later on. So the government announced in 2007, December 2007, an expansion of the Fine Arts Museum, Musée des Beaux-Arts. And your colleague, Ms. Werner, announced that there is an international architecture context for the new building. So how come since December 2007 and now we're in May 2009, not only no money has been spent, no work has been done, and now we're just deciding to have a context, a competition to get something going. What's the story? Well, the story is that this is very good news. You know that the Fine Arts Museum is on the Parliament Hill in Quebec. Many people are involved. The city of Quebec. Well, I'm not talking about November. I'm talking about the dynamics that were there when I went there last week. There was some very good news right there. John Porter was very happy. And yeah, he's been waiting for years. Well, I'm glad to answer your questions, but I'm just trying to tell you what I saw when I was out there. Mr. Pruis, on the Parliament Hill, there was a great deal of debate regarding how We're going to do the urban setting of this, and we have a commitment to the Canadian government of about $33.7 billion, and in Quebec, we reiterated that we would invest when time comes, but in this very sensitive project on Parliament Hill in Quebec City, we decided to have an international architecture competition. It will be something, a great project. Thank you, Mr. Minister, 2 years later. Well, you spoke of bridges. Now, let me speak of bridges as well. In March, the Alexandra Bridge began to be repaired until the fall of 2011. And March 18th, Le Droit says that there will be $52 million spent on the Alexandra Bridge for repairs. And then the federal government announces that 2 bridges will be renovated. April 23rd, rejuvenation of Alexandra and McDonald-Cartier bridges. And then again, the federal government announces that these bridges will be rebuilt. But I'm glad that you're talking about these bridges. They're in my writing. But how many times have you announced this? We announced it because we're ready to go ahead. That's the important point, Mr. Proulx, because basically the accelerated infrastructure can move our window faster in our operations. And we approved the Canadian Economic Plan, and we couldn't have participated in the spring. We had to wait for autumn. It's a good news for the capital region. The Alexandra Bridge is already being worked on. This is being done right now as we speak. And these are good news, and these are concrete results. We can tell the people that we're working on the structure and doing everything possible to preserve the structure, the paint, etc., the beams, and we do good work, and it's very legitimate to announce it. People want to know. Thank you. You did announce it 5 times, and I think that's a bit exaggerated. Ms. Bourgeois. Good morning, Mr. Minister. I'm glad to see you here this morning, and also welcome to your officials. 2 years and a half ago, Mr. Minister, the Auditor General of Canada had noted that the granting of a contract to Royal LePage was full of irregularities. And last April, you announced that you will not renew the contract with Royal LePage. And since April 29th, your department put out some bids with a timeline of June 19th, which is a very brief timeline. My first question is, why did you wait so long before you said that the Royal LePage contract would not be renewed? And my second question, don't you find that only 6 weeks to fill Royal LePage's place in the attribution or allocation of buildings, don't you think it's kind of brief as a period of time? Thank you for your question. Of course, there was a commitment made by my predecessor in the department that we'd try to solve the problem raised by the Auditor General, and here's what we did. And I'm proud to say that we did this here in committee. It's not an easy file. It is complicated, involving several departments, and we have to go ahead very carefully with it. This is not a kind of a contract that you can just a standard construction contract, but I'm very comfortable with being here today and tell you that we have delivered the goods. There's a process for bids in court, and I hope that the contract will be awarded in September. And all the legal timelines are being respected, so are respecting the commitments. Mr. Minister, 2.5 years afterwards, we learned that there were irregularities in the contract, and we chose to put out bids 2.5 years after that, which is the applicants have very little time to finish all the paperwork. So what is your department doing with that file? Something happened 2.5 years ago. It should have been announced 2.5 years ago that the oil lepage contract was not being renewed, leaving open the possibility to other bidders to get the file in hand and make a proper submission. And secondly, through your deputy minister, you told small and medium-sized enterprises that they were excluded from the initiative of communications of the federal government with information technology regrouping. And it's your deputy minister who came to tell us that SMEs will not lose their opportunity to submit offers. I'd like to hear it straight from you, Matt, now. Well, regarding the things you're mentioning, I'd like to set things in context. The auditor's report is coming in, and if we could do that right now, we would do it. But it doesn't work that way. There are contracts, there are legal constraints, there are lawsuits, and we worked diligently to get all the data and make sure to get a contract by September 2009. So we did deliver the goods. The second point. In fact, the professional services, as you said, were cancelled. But it was cancelled, yes. So Industry Canada came and told us that 5.1 million people, or about half of the private sector labor force, are in SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises in Canada. These SMEs are very irritated by the way in which your department is treating them, dealing with them. I think that was said openly before this committee, and I wonder if within the difficult economic times we're going through, we shouldn't rethink the contract awarding process, because now we've come back to information technology contracts, and I know that you want to have categorizations of contracts for furniture and other elements and buildings, and is there some way that you could ask your deputy ministers to work so that we leave more room for SMEs and that we take into account their economic role in Canada that's right now going through a recession? Answer: absolutely. All abound in the same sense. You're preaching to the converter. The SMEs are the economic lungs of our country, but since 2005, if you look at the results for 2008-2009, 4.8 billion in contracts, representing 49% of the total purchases. And in 2005, we had 43%. 2006, it went up to 46, and now we're up to 49. So there's a net upward tendency. You're saying that, but I already have testimony that it is working. We're getting good feedback from the ground. I'll give you another example. You want to challenge the process of information technology regroupment. And we had a report. We listened to the industry, and people in cabinet are happy. They see that we're on the right path. And this report was drafted by our department through the consultants. And the report was tabled here before the committee. And let me tell you that these are good news. There are some irritants, but we consulted, we listened, we heard them out. And I'd like to know what the committee has to recommend. This committee should try to help SMEs to make their voices heard. And I wonder if these voices that were not heard, or when they're not satisfied with the work being done at PWGSC. But having said that, I wonder if it would be possible for your deputy ministers over the coming months to sit down with SMEs of other sectors, as you said. In fact, you heard the IT sector, but we also have the furniture sector. People are saying, no, can you give the directive to your deputy ministers so that he can sit down with the SMEs to be able to come to an agreement as favorable, as you say, as the one reached with the IT. As the directives show, the statistics are constantly rising since 2005-2006. And we have the Bureau for SMEs as a tool, and you can say what you want, but we have good results. And of course, everything can be made even more perfect. And this is why I opened an office for SMEs right in Gatineau, because we saw that we needed one. We made it accessible. It's on the first floor. There's no security. It's completely different. Yes, there is a will. If we took the trouble to open another office here, as we did everywhere else in Canada, and if there are deputies in charge of it to make them work, then we have a directive whereby the Canadian government wants to deal with SMEs, and this upward trend is unbelievable, 43 to 49% in 4 or 5 years. The results are right there. Thank you. Mr. Gord for 8 minutes. Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, thank you for coming. I noticed in your opening statement that you mentioned that you want to simplify the procedures that will bring more flexibility with the markets. And could you tell us exactly what you're aiming at? Thank you for your question. This is a very interesting point. We just raised the SMEs as an issue. We have to simplify the procedures, and the industries and the SMEs are part of the solution. The last thing to do would be to play hide and seek with our partners. We'd rather come to a good understanding to see how we can simplify or improve or make more practical the contracts while remaining open and transparent. That is the orientation we have taken, and we want to adapt to the current economic reality, which is dynamic. Things are evolving regarding the procurement processes. We worked with the Ministry of Industry, of Defense as well, and the President of the Treasury Board, and we're talking about this to make sure that none of this work is being done behind closed doors, that everything be transparent. And what we often hear generally from the industry, that this has to do with the management of risk sharing, and if we come up with contracts that are not affordable, then taxpayers will have to pay the cost of a risk that the industry has to shoulder in an undue way. And the worst thing to do would be to play hide and seek with the industry. Our industrial partners in the private sector are not our enemies, they are our partners. And this is why we must come to an agreement to do good business together and to keep up a good dialogue. And we have now a bureau for SMEs, and also we could make sure that at the end of the line we get what we want, to have an open and transparent process so that we can get the best value for the price invested by us. And also there's a level of specification contracts. Sometimes when contracts come up, we have specifications that are very technical and incomprehensible to the industry. So we try to keep up the dialogue about that. Perhaps specification X, Y, or Z is not good for as specification Z for this or that project. And this is where industry can advise us, and this is why we keep our dialogue open. And these are the general orientations of our department, and simply it means to work together while listening to the industry. And that's why we had consultations. We took the example of gens, but there are consultations going on regarding furniture and also regarding the offers and the procurement agreements. Consultation is constantly going on to keep up this partnership dynamics. Very often we hear the opposition raising negative points regarding the procurement process and SMEs. Do you have any concrete examples of SMEs that are satisfied with what you're doing? Answer, certainly I have some. If you look, I have some quotes here. I'll read them out to you in English. I have them in English. Bumper to Bumper is a dealer, an parts dealer.
And receive guidance from OSME about accessing federal opportunities. Mr. Schoner was able to access requirements, and through his innovative approach and creativity was able to secure over 10,000 worth of business supplying the government with insect repellent for the Canadian Forces. Alors ça, c'est un exemple justement de quelqu'un pour qui la machine...
This is an example of someone who found the federal machine mystifying, and he went to their consultant and now is doing business. It's as simple as that. Here's another, Mr. Oscar from Brooks Industrial Metals. The same thing. They got $105,000 of business in a very technical field. And Ms. Marie-Claire Trouvette from Pass for French, which is a training center in French, and after having registered, she can now do business with the government, and she can really get business opportunities that she did not have before, because we know that at that level, regarding training, the federal government can be of help. And you see that the SME bureaus are in various places, not only the big cities, because these people travel to other regions, and we get very good comments and feedbacks. It seemed to us so complex, say some, and now we're able to do business. We have a contact, and we can go ahead. And there's an entire procedure for helping SMEs. And I invite you to come and see our Gatineau office. There's no security clearance. There is no 10th floor elevator. You can meet the people face to face, and you have the technology to show how all this is working. And you have interactive sessions, and all too often some people are discouraged because they don't know how to take this. And you can simply take a half a day to find out what's going on, and with all these testimonies that I just read out, this is not neglectable. And I think that these are success stories. This is a great quality investment of a half a day to find out what's happening with SMEs. And the work has been done, and the proof that we're on the right path is that we're on a rising trend. From 43, we've gone up to 49% with the SMEs from 2005 up to now. That represents 4.8 billion in purchases for only last year's, and that's why we will continue going on in this way. Thirty seconds. Only 30 seconds. I have a brief question. If someone is wrong, is there kind of a process for remedy? Is there a court or a tribunal? Answer. You're talking about the International Trade Tribunal that can carry these things out. It's a quick process. It's a fast track. It's not an ordinary court where you don't know when it's going to be over. And there's also an ombudsman, a new institution that's set up with the Federal Accountability Act. And the ombudsman reports to the minister with regard to small markets, and people can go and see that ombudsman to speak of their troubles, and there's a yearly report from the ombudsman to the minister. And all too often we hear that this is such a big machine, and if things didn't do well, let's close our books and do something else. So this kind of quote, we don't want to hear any more of this. We've got all these tools that are now affordable and accessible for the taxpayer that will allow them to get on with improving their business.
I only have 8 minutes, but I'm going to use the first few seconds to express, to condemn in the strongest possible terms the fact, Minister, that you were only with us here for 1 hour today. You come to us asking for the permission, the approval, to spend billions and billions and billions of dollars, and you have only 1 hour to share with us, for us to probe into this book of main estimates that's as thick as a Manhattan phone book, and you're the second minister in a row that has stiffed us. The president of the Treasury Board just did the same thing. He was booked for a paltry 2 hours. When he gets here, he announces, oh, by the way, I can only be with you for an hour. And you've done the same thing to us today, Minister. I'm not impressed. I understand you have another commitment, but you have to understand the estimates is part of the parliamentary procedure where you come to us asking for approval for spending, and you owe us more than an hour of your time. Having said that, I don't mean to be rude. I'm simply venting my disappointment. I come from a jurisdiction where the estimates in the province of Manitoba go on for days, where a minister has to answer questions on a line-by-line basis why he proposes to spend in this way. And we're being shortchanged. The people of Canada are being shortchanged by this process. My questions are specific, and they're quite narrow in scope because time doesn't permit for anything else. One of the finance minister's ways of trying to get out of deficit is to what we're concerned may be the fire sale of Crown assets. We asked a number of officials, 4 times Public Works has been before our committee, so has the Treasury Board, so has the Minister for Infrastructure. We asked them, what is the list of Crown assets that you intend to sell? Are you intending to sell things such as Via Rail, the CBC, AECL? We learned today you are selling AECL. The answers to those questions was no, 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 no such list exists. No, 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 everything's on the table, but nothing's on the table. Well, AECL must have been on the table during that period of time for you to announce today that you are offloading one of the crown jewels of crown corporations and national assets. What else is on the table? What else have you been asked to divest by Public Works?
Oui, cher collègue. D'abord, je comprends votre...
Yes, my dear colleague, I understand your comment, and let me tell you candidly that I have a commitment with my provincial counterparts, and as we just did with Ms. Findlay, let me come back to your question about assets. In the budget, the Minister of Finance said that there could be a consultation with the departments. The Public Works is not identified here. So Public Works is not in this, and I don't have to answer you for the other departments. I have enough work with my own department, and with this whole procurement issue, the Translation Bureau, and the Receiver General of Canada, I can answer about those things, but not about the other things. And Mr. Martin.
If that's the case, then I'll move on to my next question, if you can't answer on the sale of assets. Asbestos is the greatest industrial killer that the world has ever known. More people in Canada now die from asbestos than all other occupational diseases combined. You are known as one of the #1 cheerleaders of asbestos in this country. Canada spends millions of dollars promoting and subsidizing the production, sale, export, and use of chrysotile asbestos in Canada and in third world countries, because nobody else will buy it from us anymore. Only third world countries where we dump it are using asbestos, because the rest of the world has banned it. Now, I notice in your budget and the estimates that you've come to us seeking approval, and there's no guarantee we will approve them, by the way. We may reject them, we may reduce them, but we don't have to accept them. I notice you have budget lines in here for renovating public buildings to improve handicap accessibility, any number of virtuous issues associated with the maintenance and care of the buildings that are in your trust. Where is your long-term plan or budget to remove this Class A carcinogen that your government has promoted and contaminated every public building in the country with? How are we? My home province of Manitoba, they've just identified 436 schools contaminated with this deadly carcinogen, chrysotile asbestos. The Parliament buildings are unfit for human habitation by any realistic standard. It's a good thing the Canada Labour Code doesn't apply to Parliament Hill, because my staff would exercise their right to refuse unsafe work. They wouldn't come into this domicile because it's littered with asbestos. So where in your budget, as the Minister responsible for public works and these buildings, is the asbestos removal budget to make these buildings safe again?
Évidemment, comme vous savez, M. Martin, je suis très...
Of course, as you know, Mr. Martin, I'm quite aware of your thoughts about chrysotile asbestos. I respect your point of view, though I do not agree, of course. And that being said, you can call me all kinds of names and be a demagogue, call me a cheerleader. But my answer is that all this comes down to risk and risk management. In the past, the use was badly managed for all kinds of reasons. But right now, we have a completely different formula. And in the past, asbestos being misused.
Asbestos is the biggest killer in the industrial occupational disease in the world. We're asking about how you're going to get it out of the buildings, not whether or not it's dangerous. The Canadian Cancer Society says it's dangerous.
Bon, écoutez, si vous voulez faire votre propagande sur
propaganda?
Allez.
If you want to do your propaganda, go ahead.
Chrysotile Institute are the ones with tainted research. You and you're the tobacco industry's evil twin, you and your Chrysotile Institute.
J'aimerais répondre à la question, Monsieur le Président. Je comprends que Monsieur...
I'd like to answer the question, and I've heard these things very often. I'd like to come back to federal buildings. Each time we see that asbestos was used. We know that in those years it was badly used. It was not used in a safe way. Yes, we take it out. And from that point on, if Mr. Martin wants to carry on the debate, let him go ahead. But let me repeat that our government's policy is for a controlled use of chrysotile. So that's the point. Let's not get things mixed up. We want to be demagogues and tell us that there's asbestos all over the place and we're being poisoned. That's not what this is about. If there is asbestos in federal buildings, because it was badly used at the time, and we take it out, that's all.
Buildings alone that I don't believe you have budgeted for to make these buildings safe again. You have to get, no human being should be exposed to a single fiber of asbestos ever. And our buildings are littered with them. The threshold for that Health Canada recognizes of 1 fiber per cubic centimeter, 0.1 fiber, doesn't even apply on Parliament Hill because we're a Labour Code free zone. Part 3 of the Canada Labour Code was never given royal assent, so it doesn't apply to these buildings. We have no confidence that we're not exposed to 10 parts per cubic centimeter. You've got to get this asbestos out of these buildings, and it's your job. Even though you represent the asbestos mines in Quebec, your bias shouldn't put public servants at risk, or myself and my staff. Your prejudice, your boosterism of the asbestos industry is putting us at risk.
Mr. Martin, this is your time. We have free speech. The minister does represent the government here today. He's not here as an individual member of Parliament. But in any event, Mr. Minister, the time has expired, but I'll give you a brief window to reply.
Brièvement, j'ai compris de l'allocution de M. Martin.
In brief, I understood from Mr. Martin that he didn't want to get into a debate about asbestos. I agree. And I've been hearing all these kind of sordid things for the last 2 or 3 minutes. So let's stop being demagogues. Let's cut out the demagogy. In the West Block, we have 8 tests a day. 8 tests a day on air quality in the West Block. Isn't that sufficient?
Now, to Ms. Hall-Findlay. Now, we're back into 5-minute rounds, and the minister will recognize the minister's time limited. Maybe we can squeeze out 2 5-minute rounds. I don't know. But Ms. Hall-Findlay, over to you.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, et je vais encore essayer de partager mon temps, même si...
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll try to share my time with my colleague. It's about the allocation of central credits of the Treasury Board, especially vote 35. Here, PWGSC, $100 million to fund infrastructure projects for the construction to support federal investments in the infrastructure to help accessibility to federal buildings, to repair federal buildings, and to elaborate a management plan. So we gave our support. Even after much hesitation, we supported vote 35 only because we recognized the need to stimulate the economy right away. Now we're constantly hearing that there is no money in the economy. We have announcements, we have allocations, but we have no money. Mr. Minister, could you tell us what is happening with $100 million that was already dealt with, that has already begun to be spent, and where are the jobs resulting from that expenditure? Not announcements, not allocations, but right now, where are the results? Where is it working, and with what results? There are many federal buildings. As we just discussed, we want to improve access, and there are projects all over Canada that are ongoing. Of course, I can't give you the exact amount of the funds committed because we'll see that in due time. But I can tell you today that there are quite a few projects in Labrador, 9 projects, Prince Edward Islands 16, Nova Scotia 49, New Brunswick 75, 326 in Quebec, Ontario 482, Manitoba 4, Alberta 5 projects, Saskatchewan 3 projects, BC 76, Northwest Territories 12 projects. So why did you want to have that sum of $100 million for 2035, because there's work being done all across Canada, and I'll be very happy to see the report come out to show you more figures. Question, all we're hearing about is projects that are being announced, but we want...
Full reason for our supporting vote 35. I will leave it at that. On a beaucoup plus de questions, mais je vais donner le petit temps qui reste avec...
I have many more questions, but I'll give the rest of my time to my colleague. Thank you, Mr. Minister. I'd like to come back very briefly on the relocalization file. I think that there is a part of that file that you didn't get a chance to look at, and we're going to talk about this with your officials. And this file we dealt with about 2.5 years in the Public Accounts Committee, and I put the question regarding the content of that submission. And to my great surprise, I received an industrial quantity of documents, and I wasn't really surprised for receiving them because the minister told me that I would get them, and it's an immense heap of documents, and the very little time that is granted to study this submission in your department, and the time that it will take for the person who gets the award to set up the whole process. You know that there are about 20,000 files within that contract, 20,000 files. This is impossible. What will happen is that if you carry on without having any extension of time or without delaying the process, there will be just one public servant who will be the same, who will have to solve these questions that were raised a few years ago that we had decried before the Public Accounts Committee when we saw some potential possibilities, perhaps that there were bribes, perhaps there was some kind of wrongdoing. And this is why the committee suggested, and your minister also correctly accepted, not to automatically renew the contract, but rather come back to public offers. And now what you're doing has defeated the Public Accounts Committee's intention, because there won't be very many applicants, and it'll be the same one again that will get the privilege. And the part I want to talk about in the little time we have left, it's the federal buildings on the Quebec side, on the National Capital Region. It was announced by your predecessor about 2 years ago. They are putting out tenders, calls for tenders, and then it was all cancelled, and then they started another time over again. Invitations were made. The bidding was open. We don't know what has happened, but one thing we know is that there's not one single extra job created by this on the Quebec side of the National Capital Region. So it's regrettably you have to leave, Mr. Minister, because we have many things to talk about. Thank you, Mr. Poe. Regarding the relocation, the process is there. It is going on. And our civil public servants are negotiating with the industry. There's no red flag. Things are going ahead. And I think that we can't comment on a hypothetical basis, but right now there's no red flag. It's working, and we've organized the things so that we don't repeat mistakes of the past, but we have some huge client departments, and this file has to be in order. So regarding Gatineau and that building you're talking about, there is a process that has been launched. There are even 2 of them. It isn't a lack of will from the government, but the submission was not in the right form. And this went on from February to March, and some qualifications will be announced very soon, and we want to proceed in that way. And once these works are finished, we'll have 75,005, which is a very good figure. We're talking about jobs. you're talking about something else. There's a big difference. It's very different. You're talking about square feet, and we're talking about jobs. Square feet are not jobs. Thank you. Mr. Minister, do you want to leave us, or would like to stay on? In any case, my time is at noon. One more question. So thank you.
You have to leave at this time.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I'm running late.
But you'll miss some very valuable questioning from Mr. Brown. I know you'll be very disappointed. Thank you. Now, Mr. Minister, before you actually leave, Mr. Minister, it has already been expressed here by some of the members that we would have preferred to have more time with you. There is a possibility we may invite you to come back again in the near future. But thank you for attending today. Good luck with your work later in the day today. Thank you for coming. We'll continue the meeting now with officials. Monsieur Watt.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, parce que dans la déclaration...
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Now, after the statement of the Minister, he spoke of hiring something like 3,700 SMEs. But I would like to know what the process used by SNC-Lavalin to define what SMEs are, because to my knowledge, or you could tell me, if SNC-Lavalin is based in Toronto, operates in the rest of Canada, or is it restricted to some provinces? And if you're talking about the 1,500 installations for PWGSC, I know that in my region people are very dissatisfied. I would like to know what kind of control is exercised by PWGSC on the way in which SNC-Lavalin manages business. Is SNC-Lavalin simply giving contracts to already known companies, or do they go out and put out tenders? We're not talking about big contracts that are worth a fortune, but I have some very serious problems in my region in the relations with the small companies and SNC-Lavalin, where things were signed in contracts that were more or less clear and more or less legal in contracts that were signed with the SMEs. I'd like to know what kind of auditing PWGC is doing with small companies that are under the mandate of SNC-Lavalin. Are there any submissions? Answer, Mr. Chair. I'll give you a quick summary of how we work together with SNC-Lavalin.
It might be appropriate for the record to introduce the officials who are here today, because we've been working with the minister. I'll just read the list, and I appreciate you being here. There's Monsieur Francois Guimont, who's already at the microphone. He's the acting chief. He's the deputy minister. I'm sorry, deputy minister of the department. Jean-Luc Caron, acting chief financial officer, finance branch. Tim McGrath, Assistant Deputy Minister, Real Property Branch, and Mike Hawks, Special Advisor, Accelerated Infrastructure Program. Welcome. Back to you, Monsieur Guimont.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, maybe I missed it. There's also Madame Daphne Meredith, who's the Associate Deputy Minister of the Department. So going back, je retourne au début de...
Let me come back to the beginning of my answer. I'll describe that relation to you with a few figures and how we've used or are still using the PROVAC contract to do the work that we're going to do for infrastructure. We have compact with that company that was awarded to it after competition. It was awarded in 2005, a 4-year contract with options. We're in the first period of options for that contract. The total value was $5.3 billion. It's quite a sizable contract for the maintenance of our buildings, and the buildings that we're referring to, some 350 buildings across Canada. Profac is in charge of 80%, not 100%, but 80% of those buildings. The other have 20%. The other 20% is in the hands of the department. The maintenance is done by the department for 20%, and 80% is done by the contractor. The way we're working at the department, the contractor, the company, has a design program. There are always more projects than there is money. And as you saw in the documents that were published, our budget, the capitalization budget, is about 350 million. So the first time I had a series of projects that are categorized, type A, B, C projects, the most important ones with the greatest demand for security or health, things that have to be done quickly, are at the top layer of projects that are implemented by COFAC. And for a brief footnote right here before going back to your question, the Accelerated Infrastructure Program is about to increase from this year from 200 to 300 million, but we're looking at the reports we made in Parliament regarding the standard approved funds, and I have to emphasize very much that there is a mechanism. The mechanism is the same. That is very important to note. So regarding the contract relation and the kinds of measures that we have, we don't tell Profac how to do their work. They're in charge of execution of the projects, and Mr. McGrath can explain to us, if you wish, how we usually proceed with projects. And then there's money that's come through Profac and for the work that's been done. Mr. McGrath will explain the mechanism. We don't simply give the money to the consultant or the contractor. We ought to make sure that the work is being done. Perhaps, Mr. McGrath, you could interpret how you proceed with these audits.
Mr. Chair, in terms of Profac, in the contract itself that we have with Profac, we outline the methodology that they must use for securing contractors. So in the case of Profac, for projects under $25,000, they use a rotational list. So they pre-qualify contractors, they use a rotational list for jobs under $25,000. For jobs greater than $25,000, they actually call tenders, again, from a qualified list of companies. Any company can register with Profac at any time. There's a predetermined form for registration. Anybody can get on the Profac registration list, provided they meet the qualifications. In the case of the nature of our industry itself, in the real property industry, and these are stats that come from the Construction Sector Council of Canada, the majority, over 90% of firms, are small and medium enterprises within the industry itself. So the industry itself just lends itself to small and medium enterprises. And the question about does Profac operate coast to coast? Absolutely they do, coast to coast. The other specific thing about Profac is that it's very much the small and medium enterprises that we're using in delivery of those services are very localized, so they use the contractors from those specific communities where the buildings are located. In terms of audit and verification, we work on a key performance indicator approach, where Profac must submit to us their performance indication on an annual basis. We have the right to go in and audit their books at any time based on the contracts. You know, the number of complaints that have come through to our department as a result of our contract with Profac and subcontractors actually have been very, very, very few over the past year since Profac has undertaken the work on behalf of Public Works.
Thank you. Merci. Over to Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Two questions. I'd hope to ask the Minister, but I will pose similar questions to the remaining witnesses. First one related to small and medium-sized enterprises. As you know, this committee has had several meetings on them about access to federal procurement opportunities, and as we look towards drafting recommendations, I wanted to ask the minister if there's anything he wanted to highlight to us that should specifically be in those recommendations, but and I'd give that same opportunity to whoever would feel appropriate in responding to that about other things that specifically should be in those recommendations that you believe more focus needs to be put on for enhancing access.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. Frankly, I am very keen to get your report. We've discussed this. We're looking forward to see the type of observations, recommendations you're going to be making. That's the first point I would make. Second, I'm welcoming your input. Second point I would make is we are in continuous improvement. Like, procurement is not static, even less so with SMEs. It's very organic. The smaller organizations, they're across the country, various types of specialization. Why do I put emphasis on continuous improvement? We're learning through the dialogue we have with them. References were made to the furniture issue. We had 15, 14 meetings, and it's good. Like, this is an observation. I encourage good dialogue with SMEs and other industry for that matter, and we learn from that. We take an approach where in the past certain things have functioned, have worked correctly. When we renew our supply arrangements or standing offer, we want to get the input from SMEs to see how we should do. Sometimes we're a bit off. Sometimes things happen. It's a two-way street. It's not only, the dialogue leads to certain suggestions that are made. We put them in place, but things happen. I mean, these are competitions at the end of the day. So the second point I make then is we are continuous improvement based on an open dialogue. And, we have, as the minister put emphasis on, we have a bit of a work program. Frankly, it does not, as we think about procurement, it does not massively differentiate between small, medium, and big. And it speaks to the following. Our contracts can be complicated. They are. And we have to work at streamlining. First point I would make almost is the thickness by taking more of an outcome-based approach as opposed to prescriptive approach. Because the more things you have to meet, the more complicated it is. And if you are, trying to meet each man as a company, you have so many time that you can put on putting a bid forward. We appreciate that. So simplification in the context of what I would call the volume, moving towards more of an outcome-based type procurement, as opposed to prescribing how to get there. First point. Second point, we also have a tendency to not necessarily write in simple, plain language. I have myself looked at certain contracts, certain clauses, and they are challenging. So we're trying to do plain language as well on the issue of contract. The third point that the minister mentioned, which is a pretty big deal, I think, is the whole issue of risk transfer. And, we are trying, our people, to protect the taxpayer. I mean, this is super important. And, we take a hard look, and we want to make sure that we minimize the exposure to the Crown. It's ingrained in our genes. It's just the way it is. The question then becomes, is there certain areas in risk where there's a low probability of a risk to manifest itself, and can we be a bit more flexible in those areas? We're looking at that. So these are like tangible examples that would help SMEs. Excuse me?
Sorry, the other thing I wanted to ask about in my limited time is I remember a year ago, one of the things that we looked at on this committee was retention rates in the public service. And I remember at the time when we looked at it, one of the things that was brought up was the effort by the Government of Canada to make sure that public service jobs weren't just in the major hubs, but they were across Canada in small towns as well. And when we looked at this, one of the things that came out of that was that retention rates in small urban areas are actually much better than the large urban areas. And so the costs of retraining are significantly less in those small hubs, whether it be in the Maritimes or in any small city across Canada. I wanted to see if there's any updates on that process. Are we seeing that flow of public service jobs at all being spread out across Canada?
I'll make 3 points on this. The first is Public Works, like most other federal departments, is facing a renewal challenge. This is just a reality. I don't know if committee members know, but our attrition rate through pension, people leaving for after having done their career, is like almost 9% per annum. So with 9% per year, multiplied by 5, you're getting to 50% over a department of 14,000 people. I'm worried, so is the minister, about the knowledge that we need to be able to keep. So we're very active on having good planning that gives us good recruitment patterns so that we get the right skills at the right place for the right job. On the issue of Ottawa headquarters versus regional, I think it is fair to say that I'll speak from my neck of the woods. Operations that we have in the region, I'm thinking as, for instance, our pension area administered out of Matane, of the Shediac. And as an example, we also process checks for reconciliation out of Matane. Pension, like we have almost 600 people, so this is not a small unit. We have evidence to show that the movement in the region is not as high as the movement that we may find in other bigger centers, is what I would say. And frankly, I've been in the region on 2 occasions in my career. I found that regional jobs are they're very close to citizens. It's a feeling that you don't necessarily have elsewhere, if you wish, and you have a tactile sense of what the job is about. And I'm almost tempted to associate that also with a level of satisfaction because you feel things. I'm convinced that, for instance, our OSME operation in the regions, we have 6 offices. We do have one also in Ottawa. And now that we've moved it on the ground level, they will experience that feeling. You know, when you're in a region, you're going to see people. You're going to see OSME, small, medium-sized enterprise. You're going to relate with federal, provincial officials, even other federal departments. There's a proximity that you don't feel as much in other regions, and which I think do point to maybe a job level satisfaction that can be different than other big centers.
Thank you. Ms. Hall-Finley?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I have some follow-up questioning based on my earlier question of the minister, and this has to do with asset sales. And I guess it would be Mr. McGrath, because in terms of government assets in PWGSE, the most likely would be in the real property area. I think I said to the minister, our understanding is that most government assets, the largest numbers are associated with real property and Crown corporations, and so I'm asking you in terms of real property. And I understood from the minister, maybe you can correct me, or please do correct me if I'm wrong, that the minister was saying either that there are no assets within PWGSE that have been identified as such yet as potential asset sales, and or that he as minister or the ministry itself was not involved in determining what of those assets might in fact be considered for sale. Can you clarify that for me, please?
Yes, I'd be happy to. Mr. Chair, in terms of the initiative put forward by the Minister of Finance, Public Works and Government Services was not asked to contribute to the asset list that was put forward at that point in time. The Minister was concentrating on other custodial departments. In terms of our own real estate portfolio, going back to the initial sale leaseback, we'd identified 40 buildings that were under consideration. We did proceed with the sale of 7, but the remaining 33 are just assets that we continue to own and operate within our own portfolio. And we will take investment decisions on our portfolio based on what we think is the best thing to do for the portfolio. As you pointed out earlier, this isn't a good time for us to be selling assets. You know, the market conditions are such that it's probably not a good idea to do so. Well, and as a result, we manage our portfolio in the context of market conditions as well. And at this point in time, we're not looking at anything.
Thank you very much. Can you clarify for me then when the minister actually? When did you know that the minister was not asking PWGSE to contribute to the list of potential assets? I'm trying to pin down when were you asked, or when was it effectively that you were not asked to contribute to the list?
I can't tell you a date as to when I wasn't asked because the
When did you find out that you weren't being asked?
Well, the department just wasn't asked, so I can't.
At all?
Not at all. So I can't specifically pin down a date as to when we were or weren't asked.
I have to say I'm at a bit of a loss because you yourself have admitted that this is not a time to sell assets, and I go back to the concern we have that we have 2-point-something billion allocated, not allocated, but assumed would actually be seen on the books as money that was over and above the book value of assets. That's an awful lot of assets that would need to be sold to show an increase of 2.1 billion in this year, let alone 10 billion over the course of the next 5. Can I then, if I have a little bit of time left, I would like to go back to my earlier question about the 100 million associated with infrastructure. And I will repeat our concern in English that we supported Vote 35, but strictly, despite significant concerns about the budget as a whole, but specifically because we understood the need to get money out into the economy right away. It is the nature of stimulus. The stimulus is not going to be effective a year from now the way it would be. It is needed now. And I'm concerned about getting answers that indicate cannibalization of earlier projects that were announced, for example. So anyone who might be able to tell me, of that 100 million, what has actually been spent that is incremental, that is over and above what already would have been spent, that can justify the concept of actual immediate stimulation in the economy. And whoever would be best to answer that, I would really appreciate an answer.
Well, on Vote 35, as we were doing our financial planning for getting stimulus money, which in our case we call accelerated infrastructure because we're putting that cash on top of the base that we have, we've identified requirements for 100 million. That 100 million is to allow us, and that's what we're doing, to roll out and have ProFac do projects. They are doing projects. The minister ran through a number of projects by provinces, including Quebec and Ontario. These projects are consuming cash that normally would not have been available until SUPS 8, Supplementary Estimates 8. So the 100 million...
To be clear, these are projects that would not have people working on them right now, but because of this, they now have people working on them? Because, to be honest, I understand the concept of Vote 35 being bridging, and I understand all that, but my very strong suspicion is that we're dealing with projects that, if indeed they're actually involving people at work, that those people would already have been at work and that we're not actually seeing incremental employment. And that was the reason that we supported Vote 35. So I understand the concept of the bridging, but I'm still not hearing that we're seeing an actual increase in jobs as a result of this at this point in time.
I understand the question. And the 100 million in reality will be a total to more than what we would have done. To give you a clear, for instance, Alexandra Bridge, we had budgeted an amount, the one that was made for 50-odd million. If we had not had the AIP increment to the base, we would have probably waited for a year to get that increment in order to bridge the gap between the original approval of 30-odd million, where we ended up with the 52. So if I did not get that 100 million part of it out of the AIP Vote 35, I would not have been able to kickstart that project and we had to go and get revised approval, but I would not have had a source of fund. That 100 million, part of it, for the Alexandra Bridge, as a for instance, gave me that source of fund. Yes. So, and you know, I want to be respectful and fair. You're right, there is a basic, I'm not saying that Alexandra is solely out of the 100 million of the AIP, I'm not saying that at all. We were using our base. The top-up would have required, we've asked that question to, we had that discussion yesterday, would have required a time to be able to put what it is we're doing now with that contractor, Pomerleau. We got that, we awarded the project, the contract to Tim a couple of, March 16th. And that cash, we would probably have obtained that cash. It might have been 6 months, 7 months, 8 months down the road. Is that fair to say that, Tim?
That's correct.
Thank you. Mr. Anders.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I note that earlier this week there was a proposal tabled to increase the user fees for the Esquimalt graving dock in Victoria. And while this question may be slightly different than what has been proposed, I'm not sure, I'd like to know a little bit more about what a graving dock is exactly. I mean, I'm familiar with a dock, but I guess I'm new enough with regard to docks that I don't know what a graving dock is. And so I wonder if you could educate us on the importance of the dock and why the fees are being raised. Just, you know, some background generally, and maybe some follow-up questions, depending on what you say.
I had a chance to fly over and walk not too far from the graving dock, so I had a chance to see it. And believe it or not, I asked the same question, why graving? And my folks will help me, but if I remember, it has to do with scraping of
Barnacles.
barnacles. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. So I didn't dare say it, but that's what, so I'm getting confirmation. But that's what the terminology now. Today, that's not what you do solely. It's about, you know, refitting a ship and doing other work. But originally, it had to do with removing the barnacles. So that's the first thing. The second thing on the graving dock, it's an important piece of equipment on the West Coast for la réfection des navires, etc. It is I was quite clear when I was there, the demand for that dock, that capacity is there. The issue with the graving dock has to do with the fee structure, which hopefully you're going to be discussing, which has been a little too low in the past. And over the last 2 years, we've been consulting with the industry. And there's a consensus now that it would be fair to put the fee structure at a higher level, reasonable high level, so that there's not a deficit, which, by the way, Public Works used to mop up every year, around $5 million.
Correct.
So we want to be able to correct that deficit, and it's a magical effect, because the graving dock used to be part of what we call our divestiture list of assets. The fact that it was on that list was preventing people, think about it, divestiture, letting go, it was preventing recapitalization by the private sector. So the two kind of go together. Briefly, it's now off the divestiture list, so it is an asset of the federal government. And now that the private sector sees that it may not be let go to I don't know who, creating equilibrium on the fee structure will ensure that it's operated correctly. And then there will be, as well, appetite for recapitalization on an ongoing fashion of that graving dock for the long-term sustainability of that piece of equipment. So that's the logic behind the user fee increase. We went at it for 2 years of dialogue, and with the industry. And unless I'm told otherwise, there's good support for moving ahead with that fee structure, because they see in this long-term sustainability for the West Coast as it relates to fixing ships when they need to be fixed.
Okay. Can I follow up? You mentioned that it was losing, let's say, maybe $5 million a year, or that was the difference between what was coming in revenue versus what it was costing. What are the total aggregate numbers we're looking at? I mean, was it bringing in $40 million a year in revenue and losing 5, or what are the numbers we're looking at?
I'll let Mr. McGrath address this, if you don't mind.
No. You've got to understand what we do is we provide the infrastructure. So we provide a facility for small and medium enterprises to come in, work on ship repair, and any type of repair work required for a number of fleets. The type of revenue that the graving dock brings in is around $6.4 million, $6.5 million on an annual basis. Under the fee proposal that'll be phased in over a 5-year period, we see that raising up to around $15.5 million, which will include an element of recapitalization. Through the consultation process with the industry, the industries are in full agreement with that process and with the proposed fee schedule that we've consulted on.
So we were, just to make sure I understand that correctly, we were at least subsidizing that to the tune of half, if not more. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
All right. All right, well, that explains that to me. And is it just the scraping? Is that how that works? Do they scrape barnacles off, or is it chemical treatment, or how does it work?
No, it's actually, there's not as many barnacles coming in now. It's basically redoing hulls, redoing the the electronic systems, redoing engines, refurbishing cabins. There's a number of elements. It's total ship refurbishing that takes place at the graving dock now.
Okay, fair enough.
Thank you, Mr. Anders. And since Mr. Anders raised the issue of the User Fee Act here, I just wanted to point out to members we will be proceeding to adopt some or consider some motions for adoption near the end of the meeting, one of them which has to do with the Esquimalt dry dock. And we're also about to consider several $1 billion in spending. So we'll move to that shortly. Madame Bourgeois for 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Alors, Monsieur Guimont, dans les prévisions...
In the forecast expenditures by PWDSC, in the program activities, infrastructure and IT services, we see that it was $19.4 million in 2008-2009, and in 2011-2012, because it's constantly going down. In 11-12, we're at $1.5 million. Could you explain to me how come there's this drastic lowering of the figure? Is there optimism on your part here, or is there something else that you have in mind? Thank you for your question. Yes, we're being optimistic, but this is not necessarily due to the figures. What happened with the figures went down to 1.5 from 3.9. We legitimately took the differential between 14.4 and 3.9, the same thing from 3.9 and 1.5. And if you look at the structure of the department budget, we have special purpose allotments and revolving funds, and we have a part of that money in the special purpose allotment for IT services. So the money is still there. It was simply moved within the forecast and planned spending. Just to answer the question, this is an internal restructuring of activities regarding the amount of money spent. The sums remain the same. So this doesn't affect SMEs. No, not at all. Another question. The question was legitimate. Mr. Guimont, your department tabled before this committee what you called an operational justification for the IT services. It is not a business plan. It is not a working plan. The Auditor General had already asked in the past to have business plans drawn up for this kind of project. You know that the Public Accounts Committee had asked for the same thing in 96. So do you think that you could table such a business plan before our committee, or a strategic plan regarding the shared services in the other fields that we already discussed? Thank you for your question. I understand very well what you're saying. And I'm a bit perplexed given the fact that the document that we published a few weeks ago, and I have it here in English, we're talking about business rationale. So this is not a business plan. There's no word plan as such. We call it a rationale. But the description of the orientation of the department and the 4 pillars and the whys and wherefores are described in the front part of the document. And the remaining 80 pages talk about very specific activities. So the document has the government surprise initiative, and it's a question of degree. What we're reading here is descriptive in this document. Here's the rationale, the orientation, the whys and wherefores. And if we look at the tables, there are no figures in the tables except for the gens. And if your business plan should have figures in it, this business rationale does not have any figures. Let me come back, Mr. Guimont, with your permission, to the first question I put to the minister. You are the deputy minister. Last April, Mr. Paradis announced that the Royal LePage contract was not renewed. That is something you knew for the past 2.5 years. The Auditor General of Canada has said that it is full of irregularities, and you said that you are not going to renew it. So knowing that you're not going to renew that contract, knowing also that the documents for the last application that was won by Royal LePage had boxes upon boxes of documents. And at this stage, you only leave them 6 weeks to other potential bidders to get acquainted with the file, get familiar with it, and make an application or a proposal of service. 6 weeks. When we look at this in a perspective, Royal LePage had perhaps a year and a half, 2 years to get acquainted with the entire file. And you are a deputy minister. I understand that some people are very brilliant, but in 6 weeks to get familiar with tons of documents in many boxes is practically impossible. So let me put this question. For what reason did you give 6 weeks timeline? Well, I have threefold answer. First of all, that was the work by the Auditor General, and we needed the definition of what we call business volumes for national defense, for the RCMP, and the rest of the public service. And we had serious problems in the proper definition of business volumes. And we worked very hard on that, and it doesn't look like much, but the movement of people within national defense and the RCMP and the rest of the public service to check this all out took a great deal of work. That was my first point. And secondly, we put out a request, and we got quite a bit of feedback and questions, and then we had to go back and do a lot more work. And perhaps my colleague, Ms. Saint-Pierre, could give me the dates. But we had requests for information to see if people were ready to go ahead, and we had some results. And now I'm observing the very same thing as you are at this time. The timeline is very squeezed, and it's done correctly and transparently. The questions are on the web, on the MERX system, and we have the questions transparently displayed so that people could see what all the questions and all the answers are from potential competitors. And when we're talking about transferring people from one city to another, we had a great deal to learn regarding the comments made by the Auditor General to make sure that our competition will be honest and transparent. Mr. Proulx, 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Guimont, I'd like to clarify something in my mind. We're talking about the SME Bureau. We're talking about the Bureau for SMEs. I did business with some of your employees a few months or a few weeks ago, and I heard that since 2007, courses had been given in Ottawa. Attempts were made to give courses to company owners on the Quebec side of the NRC region. And out of 3 attempts, he only got 2 or 3 answers. So that didn't amount to much. And in April, after a report by Radio-Canada regarding the fact that very few contracts were awarded on the Quebec side, I got in touch once again with the SME Bureau. And on April 7th, I met Mr. Plouffe, who is the Director General of Micromeg Gatineau. I went to their offices, and I don't have their names, but I'm sure that you know them. One of them was saying the supervisor, the national supervisor, and the other was the regional supervisor, according to what they said. And they had their office at the Portage, and everything was going smoothly. And they're giving us hope to be able to communicate with the Chamber of Commerce, the Construction Association, the Aylmer Trade Association, etc. And everyone in the Gatineau Committee is happy. But a few weeks later, the minister comes out in public and announces the big announcement that in the future we're going to have a bureau for helping the SMEs. Maybe the minister didn't know that we already had such an office. The answer to your question is very clear. He was perfectly aware of the existence of this office in Ottawa, and that new office has about 29 people who were previously in headquarters. And now we have people coming from outside who have to go through security. In any case, it's a normal situation, but there's a reason for it. I went to the office with the minister, and everything is on the first floor, and you can get in and out freely and get the answers you want. So this is a new venue that is more accessible to the population. Yes, a part of it was on the 13th, 14th floor. We've gone closer to the client. Now I'd like to use my remaining 2 minutes to speak of the files that your colleagues know very well. They know exactly what it's about. It's a question of the allocation of jobs between the Ontario and Quebec side in the National Capital Region. Since the 1970s and 1980s, this was confirmed again and again. The Liberal government said that we had to have 75% and Ontario 25% in Quebec for federal public service jobs as a whole. And since those years, these things changed, and no longer all the jobs or all departments, all ministries or agencies that respond to the Treasury Board as their employer, but there's different ways of managing things. Let me tell you, for example, outside the Treasury Board's responsibilities, there's the issue of museums, Radio-Canada, the RCMP, National Defense, etc. And when we look at all the jobs as a whole in the federal government, we're far from the 25-75% split. According to our research, we tabled a written question in the House of Commons, and the government answered that if we compare it, there's 81.04% on Ontario side, whereas there are 18.4% of jobs on the Quebec side. Do you object in any way, Mr. Guimont, that we should try to put the balance back to 75 and 25 if we look at the figure as a whole? I know that all the totality of jobs, the entirety of jobs, are not necessarily in the departments or corporations that you are mandated with. Museums are not your business, nor is the Mortgage and Housing Corporation any of your business. But would you have an idea about that if we could have 25% of all the public service jobs as a whole that could come to the Quebec side of the National Capital Region? Answer, right now you have a 77-23 ratio, and I'm not challenging how we came up with these numbers. This was a government decision that went back to 1980. I'm sorry, the percentage is for the allocation of jobs that answer to Treasury Board. It's not the same thing. There you're talking about central public management, but if we want to separate out the armed forces, the RCMP members, the non-commercial organizations, and public federal corporations, the figure is 81 to 18. Regarding 77 and 23, that has been determined by the policy. That's the first point. Which policy, Mr. Guimont? I'll let Mr. Graf tell us about how this came about and what's covered by the policy. Secondly, the 77-23, we'll see it migrating it towards 75-25. And we have planned from now till 2012-13, where we should, with the buildings that we're intending to build in Ottawa and the Outaouais region, we should be very close to 76 and 24. So I'll let Mr. McGrath explain what is contained in this policy of 75-25%. This is not the policy conceived by PWGC. We are only enforcing it. Yes, I'm not asking about that. I just want to know if you will eventually agree.
Yes, I will.
Good. Okay,
actually.
and that will wrap up the round.
Okay.
Go ahead, Mr. McGrath.
The 75-25 certainly did start as an employment target, but over the years, because of the creation of Crown corporations and more people leaving the employ of Treasury Board, as Mr. Pruitt pointed out, the proxy became the measurement of office space that was, and the number of people that were employed by Treasury Board directly. So as a result, they're using Public Works as the proxy measure for the amount that they're under control of. Treasury Board is able to control, and as a result, the 75-25 is based on the office allocation of space. So right now it's 77-23. There is a 2 percentage point move. The two buildings that we have that will be coming out under request for proposals will add another 80,000 square meters to the Quebec side, of which will house approximately 4,000 public servants.
Thank you.
On a point of order,
Thank you
Mr.
very
Chair?
much, Mr. McGrath.
On a point of order? Unfortunately, Mr. Chair, I did not get an answer. My question was, would they object? They're giving me numbers. They're giving me the new policy by the Conservative government that relates to square meters, and square meters don't create jobs. We are talking of jobs. My question was, would they object?
Well, if it's probably not a point of order either, but if the witnesses, the subject matter is of interest to all members, if there was a 1 or 2 word answer, yes or no, to the question, it could be given. Otherwise, we'll end the round here.
I don't have anything to add.
No, okay.
The only point I would make, if I may, out of completeness for Madame Bourgeois' question earlier on, I think it's important that it be on the record. I made references to the relocation package, I called it like that, package, to be posted on MERS. It was done on September 22nd, le 22 septembre 2008. I just wanted that to be on the record.
Okay. Well, thank you, colleagues, and thank you for the witnesses. I'm going to suggest the witnesses remain. The first reason is that I did want to comment on that relocation contract. I haven't asked any questions today as chair, but it struck me that this is a very large contract. And in my mind, I had this image of a subway train in Toronto, packed with people. So many people on it that when it pulled into the station, nobody could get off and nobody could get on. And this huge relocation contract that exists there is so massive. I understand there's some 20,000 files in progress. Offloading that to a new manager would, in my view, take a whole lot of time. And it is so big and so massive that there's almost no ability to change horses, to change drivers, to change subway trains. And I think there's some sense that that's problematic for the department. And now I don't expect you to answer me really with any degree of particularity. That we're on the public record, and any miscues by Public Works in any of this can easily give rise to a lawsuit. And so I just wanted to make the point that, and it may come up again amongst members, that that particular contract and the sequencing involved in it may come up as an issue among members. I'll just leave that with you, and I'm not going to ask any hard questions here now, but I wanted to signal my interest in this. Okay? Now, I've asked you to stay. We're actually going to deal with a couple of subject matters. One is the adoption of the estimates. One of the envelopes is Public Works, which is yours. So I thought you might like to watch members deal with that motion, which involves $1 or $2 billion. So I'm going to thank you for the testimony today and for answering questions. Now I'm going to go to the adoption of the main estimates. And the first vote I'm going to ask members to move is that of Public Works and Government Services. They are votes 1 and 5. So I'm going to ask members now if votes 1 and 5 under Public Works and Government Services, less the amounts voted in interim supply, carry. Is it agreed? It is agreed. Thank you, colleagues. And to the witnesses, you've just got another couple $1 billion in the pipeline. Thank you for attending today, and we'll proceed with our other motions here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Now,
Members?
colleagues, I'm going to go through the list of the other estimates. We will be reporting these back to the House if members so agree. Firstly, I will put votes 95, 100, 105, and 110 under Canadian Heritage, less the amounts voted in interim supply. Shall they carry? Agreed? Thank you. Shall vote 1 under Governor General, less the amounts voted in interim supply, carry? Agreed? It's agreed. Thank you. Shall vote 1 under Parliament, less the amounts voted in interim supply, carry? Agreed? It is agreed. It's unanimous. Thank you. Shall votes 1, 5, 10, and 25 under Privy Council, less the amounts voted in interim supply, carry? Agreed? It's agreed unanimously. Shall votes 1, 5, 10, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, and 55 under Treasury Board, less the amounts voted in interim supply, carry? Agreed? Carried. Thank you, colleagues. That's unanimous. Now, shall I report the main estimates 2009-10 to the House? Agreed? I shall report them. And I should say it may well be that Monsieur Gourde will report them on our behalf tomorrow morning in the House at routine proceedings. Now,
Gourde, c'est vous le président.
You are the chair. Why should Mr. Gordon make the report? You are the chair. I don't want to have it presented by Mr. Gordon.
Next, as we continue to do the work that our electors have sent us here for, we've approved the estimates. We'll report that back to the House. There's an additional item involving the User Fee Act and the Esquimalt Dry Dock that was taken up in questioning earlier by Mr. Anders. Monsieur Gourde, on behalf of the government, gave us notice of this at the last meeting, and I think we have a motion which is going to be moved by Monsieur Gourde. And I'll just say for the public record, the User Fee Act requires that where there is a regulatory initiative to increase or adjust user fees, these matters are referred to the House and the Senate. They are then referred to the appropriate committee, in this case, this committee. The committee then may study and review, report back to the House the recommendation. And so in this case, I understand the parties have all been informed of this. They've all had an opportunity to review the proposals, the user fee proposals for the Esquimalt Dry Dock, and the parties have accepted and agree with those, and we're able to put the motion, and I understand colleagues do not wish to debate it, but they can if they wish. So, so I'm going to, is this point of order? Is this a point of order?
No.
What is it?
I thought you weren't going to allow any comment, but you just said we could actually.
Oh, yeah, once the motion is put,
Right, sorry.
sure.
I thought you
yes.
were going to run it through.
No.
My mistake,
Well, the
Mr.
hope
Chair.
is to get it through today, but
Oh, no,
what
it's,
the heck?
it's a tiny comment.
I'll try it. So I'll turn to Mr. Gourd, and I think he has a motion.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je propose à...
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move as follows, that the committee report to the House of Commons that they recommend and accept the use of proposals for the Eskimo dry dock as was been tabled on the May 20th, 2009 before the House of Commons.
Difficulty today on the precise wording of this. I've asked, well, would you please read it again? Just read it again for the record, please.
OK. Je répète tranquillement que le comité...
That the committee indicate to the House of Commons that it recommends and accepts the adoption of the proposal on the user fees for the dredging dock at Exmouth as it was tabled in the House of Commons on May 20th, 2009. This is a running translation, not the official translation.
Is sufficient. I'm happy. I think it complies with our requirements. This is pursuant to the User Fee Act, the User Fees Act, and particularly Section 5. So thank you for the motion. Now, is there any debate on the motion, Ms. Hall-Finlay?
I just wanted to say that based on the information the ministry has provided to us over the last few weeks, that we support the motion.
Thank you. Any other comment? The chair will just say I've had an opportunity to look at it. There appears to have been pretty significant consultation with all of the users, and my feeling was that the process here actually quite adequately fulfills the objectives of the User Fee Act as it was adopted by Parliament as a result of a private member's initiative a few years ago. And so I thought that was a fairly good exercise. And so having had that brief exchange and debate, I'll put the motion. All in favor? It's all agreed. There's no dissent. It's unanimous. Thank you, colleagues. It's adopted. Now, shall we report? Does this contain a motion to report to the House?
Report to the House in English.
And we will report it to the House. Agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Okay, colleagues, we can now adjourn if there's no further business. Thank you very much.